Finovate showcases cutting-edge banking and financial technology through a global conference series featuring short-form demos and thought leadership. Now, the conversation continues on the Finovate podcast.
Hello, everybody. This is Greg Palmer welcoming you to the Finovate podcast. We've got a fun one for you today. We're going to be talking about small businesses and how they can move money digitally. And joining me today, we have Robert Buenink, CEO of Unzer. Robert, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Gerd.
So to kick things off, let's just have you introduce yourself and give us a little bit of information on what Unzer is all about.
Sure. So my name is Robert Buenink. I'm the CEO of the Unzer Group. Unzer is a European fintech focused mainly on helping small and medium-sized businesses digitize their commerce, as what we like to call it. So we could give our businesses a fully unified commerce suite where we combine online, in-store, mobile payments, or generally everywhere they would like to sell their goods or services in one integrated ecosystem. We do this for about 85,000 merchants all across Europe and mostly in our core markets, which is really Germany, Austria, and Denmark.
Okay, cool. So obviously we're going to be talking a lot about kind of small businesses and digital payments. Before we get too far, though, I'm really curious just to get your perspective on what you're seeing in the markets that you're active in, particularly in Germany. What's happening on the ground there in terms of digital payments and the kind of cashless adoption compared to what other people might be seeing in other parts of the world?
Germany is certainly from a North American perspective, a very, very different and interesting market. To give you a data point, in Germany still, in retail, 45% of transactions are cash. So this whole shift to the digital payment has not fully happened yet, which makes it a very different market with different dynamics, but also an interesting market because even in a flat economy, there's of course a growth of the market size as this transition is still happening to digital payments. At the same time, in e-commerce, you see that the mix of payment methods also is completely different. Buy now, pay later, for example, has been also traditionally one of the largest payment methods, where certainly in fashion retail, shares of checkout of up to 80% are possible. But certainly it takes between 20 and 50, 60% of the share of checkout, which makes it very different. As well, bank transfer continues to be a very large payment method, and cards usually get less than 20% of the share. So in many ways, a very different market with different dynamics.
Yeah. That's a little surprising to me when you think about 45% of transactions are still made in cash. What do you think is driving that? What is happening that kind of makes it a little different from some of the other markets that you might see in Europe and elsewhere?
If you ask the average German, certainly from an older generation, they have a very interesting answer to that. They say it's because of their history, that because they had, such a very dominant government 70 years ago, they're afraid of their personal privacy, and they don't like that everything that they spend their money on is tracked. And there's nothing more private than paying in cash. So there's definitely a data protection security element behind that. At the same time, there's an element of conservatism in the market, but also I think the banking network really profits from the cash society with the charges they pay. They charge for taking money out of ATMs, which is usually still paid for, the fees for depositing money for retailers. So there's still also a lot of money being earned from this society.
That's really interesting. And I think certainly they're not wrong, right, in terms of what we know about what the kind of data that you can have when you have credit card transactions and how easily a financial institution can paint a really clear picture of who you are as a person based on where you're spending your money and what types of things you're buying. So I do see that side of it. So looking kind of outside of Germany, outside of maybe even Europe altogether, who do you think is doing a really good job right now when it comes to digital payments, both in terms of driving adoption and also creating a really strong customer experience?
I always follow the top two in the world keenly to see how they are developing their products and developing their go-to-market with Stripe and Adyen, who are, of course, key leaders in this. But at the same time, a lot of the innovation that takes place that is really interesting really comes from markets outside of North America and Europe. Looking what's happening in India, what's happening in Brazil, what's happening in Asia. There's a lot of innovation that takes place there that is very interesting to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think certainly there's a population who has really shown themselves to be very open to these kinds of digital transactions. And of course, there are governments there who are able to do a lot as well, which obviously is really helpful. We'll talk more about the governmental side in just a moment, but I want to move the conversation now to small businesses specifically. Obviously, that's a group that really struggles in a lot of ways. Society moves more and more online. So what are you seeing in terms of the challenges that small and medium-sized enterprises are facing when it comes to digital payments and kind of giving the experience that they want to their customers?
I think our customers are a lot of the bread and butter, corner store type of barber shops, local pizzerias, these type of businesses, right? And in the world where the borders between online and offline payments are fading, where big international retailers have created experiences that really go and merge these two worlds, they need to keep up on this changing digital world. And I think that's where they need to have help to not just keep up, but also innovate when it comes to their customer base. So I think that's one thing. The second thing where they really need help, I think they're still very much underserved by the traditional banking system. It's tough and clunky and slow to get help, to get an account, certainly if your business is new, but certainly also when it comes to getting credit and getting their working capital funded, there's a lot of help that they can still receive there. And I think companies like us are trying to help them with this journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think coming back to this question of, driving more of a digital adoption among consumers, what's your perspective on how much control actually the small businesses have here? Is this something where if small businesses can offer a cleaner, smoother digital experience, you'll start to see some of those cash transaction numbers dropping?
You see that change is already happening. And certainly in Germany, COVID made a massive change there. So you saw a lot of, corner pizzerias all of a sudden needing to serve their customers through takeaway and creating websites to be able to get their regular customers being able to order with them, right? And certainly also paying digital, because all of a sudden money was touched by many hands and that became dangerous. So digital payments became something that was considered safe. So that already made a shift, right? Where almost all local businesses with a really local clientele would also offer takeaway. As an example, now you're taking a takeaway order from a web shop, that is an online transaction. Of course, they take offline transactions already for ages, but now they would like to also have QR codes on the table, which then becomes an online transaction. So this is really where the customer need has shifted to a unified experience, and local retailers ask for the tools in order to be able to provide that.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those fundamental questions in terms of who is really driving these adoption rates. And there's obviously, individual consumers who make their own choices about what they want to do. There's individual businesses who make their own decisions about what they want to offer and how much they want to try and engage with some of the new payment opportunities. And then there's this group that we haven't talked about at all yet, which is the banks, the financial institutions, who are kind of overseeing maybe all sides of this. They have consumer customers, they have business customers. And in some cases, those banks are in a really pivotal position to be able to drive adoption or change behavior. From your perspective, what do you think banks could be doing a better job of to kind of make it easier for small businesses to do the things they need to do to make sure they keep their customers?
I think traditional banks have essentially something in their culture that needs to shift in order for them to be not as disrupted as they are now. Right? They're just traditionally bad at taking the merchant and or customer perspective. They're often bad at user experience, they're bad at service levels, they're bad at speed, certainly when serving smaller customers. And that just means there's a lot of room for disruption. And it's also why you see a lot of neobanks taking market share away, because, small businesses just need the tools. They need to thrive and compete, and they're looking for that service elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think you're right. The competition among banks is going to keep ramping up. There are going to continue to be these challenger banks coming in who can offer these services. So there is a forcing mechanism here that is going to push banks into this adoption, whether they kind of want to go there or not. Although to your point, it likely will be a little slower than probably a lot of consumers would hope for. Another group that's in a really good position to kind of create some change is actually the policymakers. Different countries have different political priorities, different regions have different political priorities. But what are some of those crucial pieces that a government can do or maybe needs to do to help everyone move forward?
Well, of course, I come here with a European perspective, which over the last, let's say, the 2 decades that I've been in payments have not been reducing regulation, but rather have been increasing regulation. I think that there needs to be a bit of a cultural difference of thoughts where what is more towards what is the reason of the law? What is it trying to solve for rather than how do you prove that you follow it, right? I'd like to make the example that the international or local highway of digital payments is very complex and is much like the general traffic situation, right? Where everybody goes from A to B, there's lots of cars, bikes, pedestrians going through with each other, and that is set and organized towards safety through a set of rules. But it's not the case that at the end of the day, everybody needs to show through paperwork and pictures and stored proof that you didn't break the law and go through a red light. And I think that change of thought sometimes needs to be there, certainly on the European front. At the same time, in Europe, what you see is that a lot of the regulations are set centrally, but it's still dependent on local adoption, which means that all these regulations need to be adopted to local law, and that adoption and interpretation will vary. So you have within member states in Europe, you have a bit of competition between different member states in order to attract fintech and attract companies to settle there, which just basically creates an uneven playing field. It's, you have a lighter regulatory regime for the exact same rules if you're regulated from Ireland or from Estonia than you have if you're regulated in Germany, for example. So that is also something that a lot of improvements can be made.
Absolutely. And I love this analogy of kind of regulators coming back and saying, prove you didn't run a red light today. And if you kind of take it even to a more absurd place, it's more like prove you didn't run a red light at any point in the last 6 months, right? And this is, if you think about it in those terms, this becomes something that's obviously a significant pain point for financial institutions. And it is sort of an absurdity among the regulatory community that this is the way we operate. There are a lot of ways to clean that up. And then to your second point there are a lot of places where consistency is going to be really important, and different countries having different rules, even within the same kind of global governing body, which is like, the European Union will have its own rules. But, if I can go to Luxembourg, if I can go to Ireland and I can have a different set of rules, then this obviously creates an imbalance, which can be very difficult. So I think that's an area where you're spot on. There's a lot more that could happen there. And I'd like to close by talking about a kind of exciting piece. You guys have just launched Unzer Financial Services. Can you give our listeners a little bit of information on what that is and what it will do for the industry going forward?
Sure. This is very exciting for us because from my perspective, it really completes being able to provide merchants with a full ecosystem to digitize their commerce, right? So today we help merchants with means to accept payments, to sell their goods or services. We bring them the software that they need to run the day-to-day of their store, staff, stock management, fiscalization, you name it. But they also need to receive their funds somewhere, and they need to spend it in a way, and they need to manage that spend, right? So really the last piece of the ecosystem is to be able to provide our merchants with IBANs and bank accounts in order to receive their funds, cards to spend their money with, and then also help them with the spend management within their company through one offering, one portal, one everything, so they can really manage it all from one place. And we are very happy that we will soon be able to complete this ecosystem and help them with that. With, of course, in the future tools that can help them manage their working capital and cash flow as well.
Yeah, that's excellent. And congratulations on the launch. That's always such an exciting time. We'll make sure we include a link in the description here as well, where people can go to learn a little bit more information if they want to see more about what you're doing. But I always appreciate the opportunity to hear from people in a different ecosystem than my own. And so I really do want to thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing some of the pieces that you did with us and our listeners. Again, we've been talking to Robert, the CEO of Unzer. Thanks again for joining me.
Thanks, Red, for listening.
Check out Finovate.com for information on Finovate's upcoming shows and to learn how you can get involved. The discount code Finovate Podcast will save you 20% on tickets to all of our events. And you can email us at info@finovate.com for information on sponsoring, speaking, or demoing. Thanks for listening.